I think it was the editor. The editor was probably not as like when they had like multiple times where like the same words, and like one time it's like up here there's a sentence, and then again it's way down here in context. You're thinking, yeah. So that wasn't me. I didn't write that, but yeah, I noticed that. I think it's the editor, for whoever's editing that is more the issue. Did you notice the article that was just after that though? So there's an article that was linked directly on the bottom of that one. So as of today, merchants are required to use chip reading devices now for credit card transactions. And so that's actually a new thing. And so one of the big things that's going on is a lot of merchants aren't equipped to do that. And now there's an issue in terms of, because if they aren't equipped and there's a fraudulent charge, they're actually more liable than they were in the past. Because that chip, so you know what I'm talking about with a chip in your credit card? Right, those little chips. So they've been using those in Europe for a while. It's just that little gold thing you have there, right? They've been using those in Europe for a while, and now they're coming over to the U.S. In Canada, it's actually pretty common as well. But a lot of merchants have been slow to adopt it, and so that's going to cause some potential issues with that as well. And I thought that was interesting that it was linked on that for some reason. Okay, talking about entrepreneurship, what it makes for entrepreneurs. So on Tuesday we mentioned how entrepreneurship is kind of a risky proposition. And so when we look at the type of people that get involved in entrepreneurship, either with a startup or even being entrepreneurial, typically these are folks that see the status quo. So I'm looking at how we do things all the time and say, you know what? We can solve the problem in a better way. And so they start thinking about innovative ways to solve the problem better. And as you know, Max is also taking the social venture or social enterprise class. What's it called? Social enterprise class, which does a lot of the similar stuff that we do here, but they focus on social ventures. One of the things that's important to note is when we're talking about entrepreneurs, it's just about solving problems, right? So it could be solving a social problem, could be solving a business problem. So what we'll do is we'll probably go back and forth on these sorts of things. Okay. Only 6 minutes late, no story required, right? Okay. So one of the interesting things, though, about entrepreneurs is they tend to have a personality type where they like to take on difficult challenges. Why do you suppose that's the case? Why do you think you have to be somebody who likes challenges to be entrepreneurial?
Because that's going to be most of your life is facing challenges.
Because you think about it, if you stay with the status quo, that's really easy. This is what we've always done it. We have guidelines for doing this. There's very little uncertainty. Everybody expects things like this. That's a really easy thing to do. As soon as you go out and step outside that box, as soon as you start pushing the boundaries and say, there's a better way to do that, hey, the onus is all on you now. Right? Everybody else is happy with how things are going. If you want to change it up, you take on that responsibility, that workload. You have to dive into that uncertainty. That usually means a lot of extra work on your part. And so there's some trade-off that you're making. You're saying, you know what, I think I can solve the problem better. I'm willing to take that risk, to do that research, to get out there and figure it out. But the expectation of solving that problem better is going to bring a reward of some sort as well. And the reward might be that, you know what, we do much better good for society. We have a much bigger return. I enjoy my job a whole lot more because I don't like this random button pushing, whatever it might be. So, but it is challenging. So, how do you overcome challenges? And this is like any type of challenge, right? But as an entrepreneur, you realize that there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of tough decisions, a lot of tough trade-offs that have to be made. And you have to think outside the box. And so oftentimes we are very limited in the solutions we come up with because of our experience, especially when you're relatively young, right? You have experience if you worked at a company like some of you have, worked with a family business, you have experience from school, but you don't have a really broad range of experience to come up with these creative solutions. So how do you get that information? What do you have to do in order to find out more creative ways to solve problems that you're facing? How would you go about doing it? Yes.
Are we past coming up with an idea?
Pardon me?
Are we past the step of...
Yeah, so you have a problem and you can think of some ideas, but they're all pretty much ones you already see, right? So they're not super creative, innovative ideas. So this is like for you all, if you want to come up with a really innovative idea in this class, how do you do that, right? So you only have so much information here.
I guess you could see, Google it sounds too easy, but you could literally look it up and see people in similar situations, what they did, what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, so basically you have to start doing some research, right? And Google, of course, if you have any questions or problems, usually somebody else has looked at the same thing before, you Google it, and that's one thing. But more importantly, maybe talking to other people. Maybe getting outside your particular arena for solving the problem, find something related. So you have a problem with an imaging device, right, in your particular industry. Well, what other industries might do imaging? Well, maybe I go to medical, maybe I go to television, maybe I go to something else, and see how they've solved these sorts of problems. So it's kind of like you have to start expanding your knowledge base, expanding your network, the people that you're talking to. So as an entrepreneur, that's one of the things that you really have to be good at is wanting to learn more about anything, because this is how you come up with more creative solutions. If you're only stuck with what you have in here from your limited experience, you're kind of a step behind what a lot of other people are. And so, like for me, one of the things I really like to do is when I meet people, wherever, like on an airplane or waiting in line somewhere, I'll talk to them, I see what they do, and I'll start asking questions, things I always want to know about that particular thing. So, for example, on one flight I was flying and I sat next to a general who was in charge of the Star Wars program. You know what that is? That's lasers from space to shoot down missiles. Okay? So for a long time that was just like a fictional thing, but apparently it's in development. So I asked him questions about that. I sat next to somebody who was a purchaser for Costco and asked him, how do you figure out what items to carry and what's the strategy for that? I sat next to a professional bowler. Always wondered how that worked. You know? So, but you have to kind of be inquisitive. You know? So when you find the opportunity or you meet somebody through a networking event or here on campus or somewhere else, ask them some questions, learn about their industry, get some insights that way. All right, so if you want to get ideas, you've got to get outside of your comfort zone. Okay? Other things about entrepreneurs, typically you're wearing multiple hats, right? Most startups, most entrepreneurial ventures have limited resources. So even if you're working within an existing company, you're working within the family business, if you want to go out and do something different than what's normally being done, you probably have to take it upon yourself to do the research, to fine-tune stuff, to do the design, because no one's going to dedicate a lot of R&D resources to you to get that done. So you have to be good at juggling a lot of different things. As a student, you have to juggle some things, but as you get out in the workforce, what you find is when you have, your home life, when you have, 40 to 60 plus hours a week that you're working, and you have to sleep and eat, there's not a lot of extra time to start examining these things and try to balance it out. So it gets to be quite a challenge. When I was running one of my businesses, I typically was working at least a 40-hour work week, and then I would end up working like another 30 to 40 hours on the business on the side. And so it ends up really putting a lot of pressure on you to balance things out. Usually end up getting less sleep as you're doing things. But you have to be really good at doing those sorts of things. You don't always make the right decision with a startup or as an entrepreneur as you're trying to figure things out. So you have to be able to adapt, or oftentimes we say pivot, when you get some information or you get some problem that doesn't like to be solved the way you're approaching it, so that you can look at it from a different angle. So it's another issue to do that. It's hard work. You have to be good at problem solving. Hopefully that's something you develop while you're in school as well. And just kind of, as I mentioned, a willingness to learn information, but also new skills. As we saw from Instagram, here we have Systrom, who basically spent time working on project on his own to learn how to code. Anybody ever hear of Mark Zuckerberg? Okay, so he learned how to, he perfected his coding by working on small projects on his own. And so one of the things that we find with a lot of tech entrepreneurs is they naturally gravitated to these sorts of things already, and so it was easy for them to come up with the thing that they end up turning into a business. So entrepreneurship, so we talked about entrepreneurs themselves. Entrepreneurship is all about finding these unsolved problems, these opportunities out there, and finding a way to solve them in a way that benefits either your company, if you're a for-profit, or society or your community for not-for-profits. So it's identifying some unmet need and then solving that in a way that's better than the existing solutions. Right? Because if you don't solve it better than an existing solution, nobody is going to want to buy your product, no one's going to want to use your service, or whatever it is. Okay? So that's pretty basic there. So if we look at relatively recent, so Zuckerberg is probably the newest one on this list. If we look at some pretty big companies and the age of the entrepreneur when he or she started them up, what do you notice about that?
They're mostly young.
Right? Most of them are under age 40, right? What else? They're under age 40, but they're over age 20, right? 19. Michael Dell. So Dell and Zuckerberg, when do they start their businesses? Yeah.
College.
Yeah, they started while they're in college and basically dropped out. Okay. Pardon me? Yes. Well, that's the thing. If you think about why most kids go to college and why most... Oh, wait a second. David, you just looked at the clock. What did you notice?
I didn't notice anything.
You didn't notice anything? I'm sorry. I just noticed that it's 9:16, Sam. You know what that means?
Well, I don't want to have to share this story, but I woke up to my phone exploding. I set my alarm for 7:45 and it ended up exploding at that time.
Wow.
My room was like in shambles. I had to dig through all the debris. My roommate, who we share a room, I don't know if she made it out alive.
Uh-oh. You didn't check?
I didn't.
Wow. Wow. That's pretty hardcore. All right.
An hour and a half to dig through. Sorry, I apologize.
Okay. Well, I hope your roommate's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Exploding phone. All right. Was it an iPhone?
Yeah, it was.
Well, I hope you can get a new one now.
Yeah, I think you can. I've insured it.
Yeah, okay, excellent. All right, so what we see is typically they tend to be between this age range, 20-ish and 40-ish, right? Why do you suppose that's the case? Why do you think they're all like past 18, but most of them are under 40? Yes, Tim.
They're not potentially like tied down to families or like other financial, they can take risks and recover.
Yeah, so I think that's two really good points there. So when you're younger-ish, you have a lot fewer responsibilities. So you think about it, if you have a family that you have to be concerned about, a mortgage you have to pay, things like that, well, potentially not making any income for several years and investing everything you have in that, that's kind of scary, right? So actually, when we look at Zuckerberg and we look at Michael Dell, pretty much going to college on their parents' dime, decide to pursue a business, drop out. They weren't having to worry about a lot of other people other than the business that they're doing. In addition, what else do people have when they're younger compared to when they're older? Bless you.
More energy.
Yes, you have more energy to burn, right? You think about the hours that these entrepreneurs put in to start these businesses. When you're younger, you can sustain that a whole lot longer, believe it or not, okay? When I was in college, as long as I got 5 hours of sleep, I was good to go. And I could get by on less than that, right? And I could do that for weeks and weeks on end. And then what I would do is I would just catch up. I would store it up on the weekends, right, when I had to. My wife tells me you can't store up sleep, but I believe you can. Okay? But basically as you get older, it's more challenging for you to actually put in the type of workload maybe that you could do. So what that means is you all are pretty much at the optimal stage for getting involved in some sort of entrepreneurial venture, right? As you get older, it becomes harder to do these sorts of things. Either because you get older and you just can't do it, or you have more obligations, things like that. So definitely something to think about now. If that's, several of you mentioned you thought about starting your own businesses. One of you already has one. Think about that. All right, opportunity. Formal definition that we'll be using here because we'll be looking at it a couple different ways. A favorable juncture of circumstances with a good chance of success or progress. Okay? So, several things come into play to make an opportunity something worth pursuing. Okay? So, when we're looking at opportunities, there are three aspects that we'll look at that combine to make it something worth pursuing as a venture. So again, you're young, you have a lot of energy, you want to start a business, but you need to narrow down to something that has the highest probability of success. Otherwise, why bother doing it? Kind of thing. Okay? So, probably two starting points that are easier to address. One is you have an interest or a passion for a particular thing, right? So David has a passion for soccer, so he has a business for training soccer players, right? You have a passion for it, you're very committed to it, right? In addition, though, just because you have a passion, so my daughter was asked to go to a rec soccer practice last night by one of the parents of one of the players that she had been working with for some other thing. And she went there and she was just like, wow, this is just so bad. The coach has been coaching this team for like 6 years and he has no idea what he's doing. And she said, he's very passionate about it, but he has no capabilities or skills for actually doing it. You have these kids that have been learning soccer for 6 years, but they have actually no development process that is taking place. So when you're looking at opportunities, you either have to have the capabilities and skills, or you have to be able to develop them, as we saw with the Instagram, right? He was passionate about it, didn't necessarily have all the capabilities, had some, right? And so he developed those in order to be able to do the programming to make this happen. Okay? So those are two parts. And these are ones you have some control over. Right? You can be committed to something, passionate about it. Right? You can develop the capabilities and skills. The third one is the tough one. Right? So does the context in which you want to execute this, is it favorable for this sort of thing? And this is where a lot of people, a lot of businesses, this is where people focus on trying to find good opportunities. They usually assume these two and say, okay, so what's a good opportunity? Is there new technology out there that will make for a favorable product? So you think about like the Tesla Roadster, right? So they just announced a new car, the Tesla X, which is like some SUV kind of version of it. Is there a favorable environment for electric cars now? Yes, it seems like people want to have them. In fact, in the state of California, there's actually legislation was passed a long time ago that said by a certain year, which we've already passed, a certain percentage of all vehicles on the road have to be alternative fuel, including electric, right? And there's other things going on. But are there social things, technological things, regulatory things that make it a favorable environment for this particular opportunity you're looking at? If you have these first two down pretty good, but the top one doesn't work because there's lots of competition, technology isn't refined enough, then it's not going to work. Okay? But you have to have all three of these in order to have an opportunity that is going to have a high probability of success. And even then, it's not guaranteed. But if you don't have one of these, the likelihood of failure is very high. Okay? And unfortunately, we see hundreds of thousands of businesses start up every year because people have the interest, they have the capability, but the context isn't good enough for it. Okay. So, successful businesses have to have a lot of different things on them. What's the number one reason why businesses fail? Anybody know? Well, first of all, how many businesses failed? I think we mentioned this last time.
It's like 7 out of 8.
Yeah, 7 out of 8 new businesses typically fail. Right? Pretty high percentage, right? And that's of all businesses. It's not just like the big ones that people spend a lot of money. It's like when you decide to start a small coffee shop or whatever, right? So it's all of them, right? Usually, business failure is related to directly inadequate research having been done by the founders in the first place. There really wasn't a problem that had to be solved. Oh, you weren't aware of the competition that was already out there or potentially coming in. You didn't have the knowledge on how to actually start up. So many, when I talk to people, so I get a lot of people that come by and they're interested in starting businesses, and this is either students or people out in the community. One of the most common things people want to start is, I want to start a restaurant, I want to start a bar. Okay? Why do you think people want to do that?
Everyone eats.
Pardon me? Everyone eats?
Yeah.
Everyone eats? A lot of people drink? Right? It's something that we're familiar with, right? We purchase the product category, we frequent those places, it looks like it's fun, looks like something we can do. I had a gal, a woman probably 3-4 years ago, want to start a paleo restaurant. You know what that is? A paleo diet restaurant? What's paleo?
It's called the caveman diet.
Yes.
It's just eating food in the raw.
Yeah, like everything raw and unprocessed. And she really believed in this, and she liked it, and she thought there would be a really big market for it. So the very first question I asked her is, have you ever worked in a restaurant? She said, no, but I think I can figure it out. So, one of the things I'll say is that restaurants in particular have very, very tight margins if you don't know what you're doing, right? In terms of making sure that you don't have too much waste, which is one of the biggest things, and that you're making sufficient profitability on the portion sizes and everything you do. Okay? But it's really challenging. Anytime you want to start a business of any sort, the first thing I would recommend to you is to go find a similar business and work at it for at least 2 years. Even if it's at a really, really low level. Because you need to go in and you need to learn all the pros and cons and the pitfalls and all the issues as to what's going on. And most of the time people just want to go into it with a basic idea, hey, we can do this, but not really understanding how the business works, not understanding the industry, not understanding what the competition's doing, not understanding what the future trends might be in that area. And until you get into the business, it's really, really hard to figure that out. Right? So, other issues you run into, as soon as you have to have more people besides you and or the other founders, you have to deal with employees. That becomes very, very challenging. At my wife's business, right now, they've grown in the last 5 years, going on 6 years now, from 11 employees to almost 60 employees, the number one thing she deals with every day is hiring, firing, and training people. Everything else is really easy to get working fine, but hiring, firing, and training, as you start expanding your workforce, takes a lot of your time. And most entrepreneurs, when they start businesses, they're really passionate, bless you, they're really passionate about an idea, they really like a particular category. They may have no experience and or no inclination to want to deal with people. And so consequently, the startups that end up scaling up being really successful usually hire a professional manager, somebody who's good at that in order to continue to grow. But that's one of the critical things. A lot of times, entrepreneurs who start up businesses are great idea people and they're bad finance and accounting people, right? They don't pay attention to the numbers. They just want to be the creative side of it. The numbers is what's going to make sure that your business stays in as an ongoing concern over time, right? If you don't get sufficient cash flow, if you don't make profitability in the long run, your organization is not going to exist anymore. So these are things that oftentimes get neglected as people think about starting up businesses. And so in entrepreneurship, and in this class in particular, one of the things that you'll realize is that you need to be mindful of and become at least conversant with all the various business disciplines. Because one of the things that you can't do as a startup, as a small business, you can't hire experts in all those areas like a big business. Which means either you or one of your founding team has to develop that expertise. So consequently, the best founding teams typically are made up of, say, 3 or more people. They have financial background, have marketing background, have people management background, okay? Probably sales background. Sometimes those founders can have multiple hats, right? But you need that sort of expertise on your team to be successful. If you don't have it, then you need to try to pick it up. What's easier to pick up is the management, the soft skills. That's easier for people to pick up. What's harder to pick up are the technical skills, finance and accounting skills. Okay? So, just things to be mindful of. Okay? Business concept. So what makes a good idea? So we talked about opportunities and these 3 things that you had to have. So what in that top area, what makes it something that has a good context? Has to solve the problem better than what's being solved already. So it can be something that's brand new. So anybody ever hear of graphene? Okay. So graphene is a material that they're looking at making batteries out of. It's ultra light, ultra thin, and basically graphene batteries will be able to be instantly charged and hold much bigger charge than any current battery now. So it's something that's completely brand new. Unfortunately, making graphene in large quantities is very, very expensive now. And so it has been for several years. When that comes down in price, when they are able to optimize this process, one of the things I guarantee is going to happen is everybody's going to have an electric car. Because one of the biggest issues with electric cars now is the range due to those batteries, the charging time due to the batteries, and the excess weight due to those batteries. Graphene solves all those problems. So graphene batteries is going to be a big deal. If you see somebody that's got a breakthrough there and wants an investment, put money in it. You will be worth lots of money later. Okay? Something new. Engage. Oh, I can. You want me to tell you a story about that sort of thing that I blew off and I didn't pay attention to? Okay. So I was in Connecticut, and I had my daughter at the time was really young. My wife was part of this parents group, where moms to get together and the kids to do play group, that kind of stuff. Anyway, this group had a Thanksgiving get-together, all the families, and so I was talking with 2 other dads that both worked for a company, chemical manufacturing company in Groton, Connecticut, called Pfizer. and one of them was chemical engineer, the other one was economist. And the chemical engineer came over to me and said, if you got some money now, you want to invest it in Pfizer. And I said, oh, well, why is that? He said, well, just believe me, it'll be worth your while, right? You should do it. I said, I got some money. I'm not going to just kind of randomly. I know Pfizer. They make all this smelly output and all this kind of stuff all the time. And so he's telling me, yeah. Well, the reason why you want to do this is that we've been working on this heart medication. It's been an utter failure, but it's had this really interesting side effect, which we think is going to be a really big seller. What do you suppose that was? It's this little blue pill. Viagra, right? This was 5 years before Viagra hit the market. The price of Pfizer stock was next to nothing, right? Somebody told me, gave me some insider information, which I wouldn't have acted on, right? If I had known that kind of stuff. But basically said, hey, there's something coming down the road which is going to be a big seller for them. If I had put $5,000 into that, it probably would have been worth at least 10 times, maybe 50 times that now. Okay. If I put a little bit more than that, I probably wouldn't be teaching here. I'd be in Aruba instead. I like Aruba. Okay. Anyway, so that's my story. It's oftentimes something new will be coming down the road. You need to keep your eye open for that, to understand that. So that's why I tell you about this graphene thing. It's pretty cool. It's got to solve the problem better. So either new technology, something brand new, or you have a better way to solve a current problem. So you think about what's a common problem that you all have? Say early class in the morning, waking up, right? Because your phone buzzes and it's really easy to ignore it or throw it or whatever, right? Okay. So what if, not for most of you, you're all here on time, obviously, right? But what if there's one of the students in prior classes, this seems like a problem they want to address, so they come up with a solution. So one of the things that you could create is a phone that, so you want an alarm that wakes you up, but you have a roommate like Sam, who hopefully her roommate's still alive, right? You have a roommate that doesn't have to get up at the same time, right? So how do you get something that's strong enough to wake you up, yet doesn't bother the other person in the room, right? So one potential solution might be that you have an alarm that blows cold air just on one person in the room or one area when it goes off, but it doesn't make any noise, okay? So, like my wife on Tuesday, she gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning because they have an early meeting. Well, you know what? I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Tuesdays too because she has a loud alarm, turns on all the lights, uses a hairdryer, all this kind of stuff, right? It would be nice if there was some way to not disturb the other person. So you could come up with a better solution than what's currently out there by doing something creative. It doesn't have to use new technology. You just find a different way to solve that problem. And this is where we see a lot of incremental advances. So are you familiar with the Nest thermostat? Have you seen? Okay. So the Nest thermostat is it's a small digital thermostat that basically you can control with your iPhone, right? So it taps, or your phone, it hooks onto your wireless network at home. So you have to have a wireless network. And it also learns your habits over time to, like you're coming and going, so based on knows where you are with your phone and stuff like that. So when it knows when you're around, so it can predictively know that, and so it only turns on when it needs to be on. It turns off, so it makes your house much more efficient in terms of heating and cooling because it doesn't guess. I mean, it doesn't have, like, normally your thermostat is just preset for times, right? Or you got to manually do that. Here, it actually optimally learns what you do, so it's much more efficient. It's a better way of doing things. Okay, let me go on. Underserved or new markets. So very commonly, you'll have a product that maybe starts off from another country. So especially when we're looking at technology in cellular phones, Japan typically will get the latest technology first, and then it'll be propagated to other markets, like come over here and other places like that. Or it may be that we have a new technology we develop here, and we go to another country that's less developed, and we introduce it there. So bringing a technology that already exists, but to a different marketplace. New logistical aspects of it. So back in the olden days, if we wanted to get software, we had to get it on these little square, actually first it was these big square disks. You probably have never seen a 5 1/4 floppy disk, have you? Right? So we used to, that's how we got software. And a 5 1/4 floppy disk held 128 kilobytes of information. 128 kilobytes. That's like the size of one picture on Facebook, right? Like the tiny little, that's all you could hold on one of those. So when like you installed Windows, like I got the very first version of Windows I got, you had to have like 20 of these, and there was like next to nothing. Then we went to the little 3.5s, right? Then we went to DVDs or CDs, then DVDs, right? Now how do we get software delivered?
Flash drive or cloud.
Yeah, it's direct delivery of content. You download content directly online, right? So all these new delivery methods for that particular product. Similarly, you think of like grocery delivery, Amazon Fresh. Anybody ever see that? You know, so instead of you going to the store, they deliver it to you. So you're not changing the product at all, but you're changing the convenience aspect of it, right? Recently, Amazon Prime introduced a new service. Did you see that? What's that going to be?
Like a lot of products they're selling, they can available for delivery within 2 hours, like the Seattle area.
Yes, and how are they going to do that? So that's really cool, right? You order something, it can be delivered within 2 hours, right? How are they going to do that, do you know? No, they're not going to use drones for this. That has not been approved.
A bunch of outside contractors or something.
No, well, yes and no, but it's a unique combination of models. And we actually have, I don't know if I'm doing it in this class. I think we are. I'll call it yes, David.
Is it going to be people or the same type of philosophy of Lyft and Uber?
Yes, they're Uberizing it, right? So basically they're saying, hey, I have this delivery, it has to go somewhere in town in 2 hours. Who wants to do it for pay? Right? So it's peer-to-peer delivery service. And that's how Amazon's going to do that. And one of the things I would argue is these peer-to-peer models, so like Airbnb is like another one, Uber, Lyft, right? These are things that are going to become much more commonplace. Because basically what it does is it uses unused capacity, that is your availability with a car, in order to solve a problem, and then the company doesn't have to build out infrastructure for doing it. It's like way cheaper to pay you $20 an hour to make a delivery than it is to maintain a fleet of vehicles, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. And then the last one, increased integration. So this is the idea that I'm solving your problem better because I have more knowledge about the nature of the problem. We have more two-way communication. I'm able to give you just-in-time delivery of stuff when you need it. So making it much more efficient because of this additional integration. All right. So something new can be a new product, service, just a new feature or a new technology. Something better. Usually the first way companies try to make something better is they keep adding on new features to the particular product until you see value on it. This is something we refer to as feature creep. And the reason why this happens typically is because the core value of the product itself isn't enough to convince you to buy it. So the company keeps adding on things that they think you're going to value till you get it. So, for example, like if you have a new cell phone, one of the things you notice, like when the cell phone 6S, does anybody have a cell phone 6S? Nobody yet, okay? So I don't have one either, right? So cell phone 6S comes out, and of course they sold over 100 million the first week, right? But comes out, and in order to convince people to buy it, they had to add additional features, right? And so I don't even know all the additional things to the 6S, but basically for me and for a lot of other folks, there weren't enough extra things to it, I think, right, to make it as big a seller as it could have been. So that's the number one thing people do, or they lower the price, right? People aren't buying my product, that means they're not seeing enough value at the current price point, I'll just drop the price. All right, that makes it better. Make it higher quality, make it faster, make it more convenient. These are all incremental ways of doing it. Now the problem is, with all these things, all these ways of making it better, can they be replicated by your competition? Right? Can they make it more convenient? Can they make it faster? Can they make it lower price? Yes. Right? So the first way, coming up with something new, is the way to hit a home run. Right? So Instagram was something new, is a home run, made a lot of money on it. These things are smaller incremental changes. You're going to probably have to do them just to retain your current customer base. They typically aren't going to be home runs where you're going to be able to attract a whole lot of new people, though. Okay. Going to underserved markets or new markets. Again, this is something that if you go and show that there's a new market for this, typically competition is going to come. So it's a shorter term solution to expansion. Basically what ends up happening is that you have to continue to expand to new markets. Right? And so you see a lot of businesses do this, right? So they start off one area, and probably like your fruit delivery service, right? You probably started off smaller, delivery one area, expanding. Eventually you've expanded everywhere you can. That's it. You've got to come up with some other way, because that's not enough anymore. And it might be a quality, it might be a speed of delivery, it might be,
Packaging's big.
pardon me?
Packaging's big, like,
Okay, yeah, packaging in terms
what
of
people look at.
yeah, that's one of the things that gets me about fruit. So my wife, we like to can peaches, pears, make applesauce, and so we'll get a lot of fruit. And when you go to the grocery store, it's really displayed really pretty in the one of and everything. But when you buy it by the box, oftentimes they don't. It's not as pretty that way, right, for display. And so it's like, wow, this is wild, because it always looks so good in the store, but when we get them for canning, they're just like, not near as good looking. But sometimes they are. New delivery systems, I mentioned direct download and things, and so that's probably the most common way. But Uberizing stuff now, I think is going to become very big. Think of like the U.S. Postal Service, right? Really big throughout the country, is not profitable. What could the U.S. Postal Service do in order to increase profitability? Right? Well, right now they have a whole bunch of centralized hubs, and the way the delivery service works, it's on certain hours, certain days, dedicated trucks. I mean, they have a lot of costs, a lot of infrastructure there. What if we were to Uberize the Postal Service? Right? Well, that's kind of scary, because then random people have your mail. Right? So there'd be some other implications for that. But I think that you could come up with a better delivery service than that's currently being used. But the fact is, the Postal Service doesn't have to make a profit because it's subsidized by the government. They have no incentive for doing it. Right? Versus, you look at UPS, right, where it's a purely for-profit, and they're constantly coming up with new lighter trucks, new delivery systems, new tracking systems, everything, because they don't get subsidized by the government. Increased integration. Trying to think of a good example here. So oftentimes, if you, say if you're buying a suit or something, right? If you go to a place to buy a suit, They'll measure you out and they'll do that. They'll also sell other items that kind of match your suit. So you get a shirt, matching tie, shoes, belt, right? So they kind of make one-stop shopping. So when they know you're going to get one item, here are other items that typically would sell with that. And the same might be with electronics. So when you buy a phone, for example, they're always, what's every phone come with when you buy them? What's that?
Charger, headphones.
Charger, headphones, right? Almost always, right? Now sometimes you might get something else with it. You might get a car charger with it. Right now, Samsung is doing those cordless chargers. Does anybody have one of those? That seems really cool. Where you just put your phone on it, you don't have to plug it in anymore. I think that's really cool, right? So you're going to see some of these additional things that end up getting integrated in as well. Okay. Oftentimes you'll have hardware that comes bundled with software, right? Every computer you buy typically has an operating system that's integrated in, right? Bundled. Okay. Understanding the market. So, as I mentioned, one of the big reasons why companies failed is because people didn't do proper research, right? So, you need to figure out what the problem is that you're trying to solve, who has the problem, how many people are there with this problem, how big is this problem, that is, how much pain is it causing your target market, so you know what they're willing to do to solve this problem. Right? You have to research all these things. If you don't know these answers, then you don't know the proper solution to provide them, the proper price point, delivery, and things like that. So these are all issues that you have to figure out. You need to understand the industry and the trends within the industry. So oftentimes you'll have a very mature industry where there's lots of competition in there. They already have established products and brands. Really hard to break into that. Okay? You need to know that ahead of time. Like for example, I had a student that really wanted to set up a coffee shop. Okay? If you're in the Seattle area, what's one of the big trends in the Seattle area? What's that? Coffee, Starbucks in particular. Where is Starbucks? Everywhere. In fact, Starbucks' set strategy is, we don't want you to have to cross the street to get to our store, which means you'll see Starbucks on multiple corners on intersections. Okay? If I'm setting up a coffee shop, do you think that's really tough competition to face? Yeah. Why do you think Tully's doesn't do so well? Okay? Except for the one down here where there's no Starbucks around, right? Okay. Yeah, so you have to understand, what the market's like, what are trends. What if all of a sudden there was an anti-caffeine trend? Do you think that would affect the demand for coffee? It would change maybe what people want to have, right? In essence, I would argue this is one of the reasons why Starbucks has introduced Teavana, right? Because people maybe are more interested in green tea and stuff like that as well. Okay, so there's other trends going out there. What are the players in the industry doing? Are there more and more fragmentation, small players, or are we seeing a lot of big box companies? You think of like back in the olden days, there were lots of corner hardware stores. Right now, maybe you see a couple Ace stores, maybe you see a couple of what's that other store? There's one in Woodinville. I can't remember the name. Small hardware store, but invariably there's Lowe's, there's Home Depot, and they're stomping out everybody else. Right? A lot of consolidation in the marketplace. If you are trying to start a small business in an area like that, it's really tough. I would argue with a soccer academy, it's kind of tough because there are some pretty big players, right? So you got to go to a location that those big players aren't heavily involved in, or offer something completely different. Okay, so lots of different things. And one of the big things that we're facing here is not only do we have domestic competition, but we're having people from other countries coming in and competing with us as well for both products and services. All right. You have to have a clear vision and mission for your company to guide the decisions that you make. You have to know what you stand for, what you're trying to accomplish, and how this is different and hopefully better than what the competition's doing. So, oftentimes, what we see with businesses, as I mentioned the first day of class, usually people start a business without even drafting a business plan. They say, you know what, I want to do this sort of business, and then they start get involved in operations, and their whole focus is, how do I get by the next day? And when you're that caught up, you miss the bigger picture, right? And because of that, oftentimes you get behind the competition, you start behind them, and you get further behind, and it makes it difficult to sustain your business over time. Okay? So you have to have an idea, this is what we're offering, so we're going to be a specialized company that only serves a small niche market here. That's all we're going to do. We're not going to try to expand over here to compete with other companies, things like that. Okay. You have to have a good management team. For your business plans here, your management team is the core is going to be based on the members in the class here, but you can also bring in outside advisors for that team. And so if you're doing something that has to do with warehousing, distribution, and packaging, then I bet Matt has some family advisors that would be appropriate for that. If you're doing something in technology, then maybe you need somebody that has that expertise to bring in on your team. And if you're doing a company, if you're actually doing this company, again, when we look at Instagram, right, the first hire that he made and then ended up being a co-founder was an engineer, was an actual programmer, right? Because that was a core thing that he needed for that business to work. Okay? So you have to bring in appropriate folks. And oftentimes it's tough because the founders might be two people that just get along, but they'll have a lot in common. And they won't have all the necessary skills to actually execute what's needed. In fact, they might have a lot of redundant skills. And so it makes it kind of tough. Employees. So when you first start out, you don't need a lot of employees. Usually it's the sweat equity of the founders that you're doing. But as you scale and expand, you will have to hire employees. And so there's a whole lot of human resource issues that you'll have to deal with in terms of the hiring, the firing, the training, withholding, and taxes and accounting. All that becomes much more complicated as soon as you hire your first employee. And so what a lot of companies will do is early on, they'll bring people on, but they'll make them part owners of the company, even if it's small parts, small fractions, right? That works, but it also dilutes your ownership over time, and it's not something you necessarily want to do. If it's a not-for-profit, though, and you all are trying to accomplish the same thing, then it doesn't matter, right? Oh, somebody new's coming in, we're not making any salary anyway for this particular social venture, so everybody's just an owner rather than an employee. So different ways to handle that. One of the things with employees, especially somebody who's very capable, somebody who has the capability of making a good salary at another position, you're going to have to convince them that it's worth their while to come work for your company. And this is one of the reasons why you might draft a business plan, to show where you're going, how you're going to get there, and to convince somebody that you really want to come and join your team. Okay. Financial control. This is probably the biggest thing that students struggle with in the class here, but also it's the biggest thing that entrepreneurs typically struggle with. Very few companies are started by people that are financial and accounting experts. Usually they have technical expertise and they have to hire this part out. An easy way to do it is to put a CPA or CPA firm on retainer, right? So you end up paying for this expertise. But there are two types of expertise as an entrepreneurial firm that you should be willing to pay for. One of them is your accounting expertise. What do you think the other one is? It's another place where you get a specialized degree.
Lawyer?
lawyer. The other place, the two places that your businesses is most likely to get in trouble is with the accounting or the legal aspects of it. Those are two areas that rather than self-learn everything you need, you're better off hiring a professional. Okay? So we'll talk about a lot of this stuff, but those are two areas you really need those. Things that are going to happen over time, you need to be mindful. Competition, the competitive landscape. If you have shown that this is a great opportunity that's being underserved, other people are going to take notice. They're going to try to jump in. Usually, you can expect to see some big competitors come in, especially in the tech area. So, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So say you come up with a new web application that's working pretty well. You shouldn't mind if Amazon or Google or Microsoft is really interested, because if you've really cornered the market well, if you've really done a good job, it's cheaper for them to buy your company than it is for them to replicate what you're doing. And this is actually what the Amazon, Microsoft, and Google all have humongous cash reserves in excess of $75 billion. Right? All three of those companies. Apple has $150 billion cash reserves offshore. If they see a really cool idea from a startup, right, they're more than happy to go and buy that company just to get that intellectual property, get the head start, and to potentially hire those people. So it's not a bad thing that competition is coming in if there's that potential. But if you show that there's a great market, but you don't do a really good job at exploiting it, other small businesses come in. Well, if they do a better job, then those are the ones that become the takeover targets. And you just kind of get knocked out of the whole thing. So that's one thing to be mindful. Technology is constantly changing. You have to stay up on that. Because if you bank on the fact that, you know what, steam engines is the future, and all of a sudden the gasoline engine comes out, you're out of business. So like right now, you would not want to bank on fuel-efficient gasoline engines for vehicles, because that is not the future. That is a necessary condition for now, but the future's not even hybrids. The future is electric cars, right? As technology advances, those are going to become more efficient, longer range, lighter, and cheaper. All those things beat out diesel and gas engines. So don't invest in those other things. And then social changes. You know, you think about here in the United States, even what's happened, this past year in terms of marriage equality, right? That completely changes the social environment for a lot of companies. When you think of the wedding business, things like that. Everything that was done for hundreds of years before has now got some pretty big changes, right? And that could affect your business as well. All right, let's take a break. All right. So in terms of new technology, so one of the things that we look at is that technology kind of comes in waves historically. So, back in the olden days with the Industrial Revolution, we had some early waves. We've gone through electrical, chemical, petrochemical, digital wave. And right now the current wave that we're on is kind of the sustainability wave, right? And the idea is that these waves kind of permeate all other types of businesses. They tend to get incorporated. So you think about like the .com era, right? So when the internet first came out, there were some businesses and companies that specialized in that. But now pretty much everybody has to be involved with the internet and technology. It just kind of permeates everything, right? So one of the advice that's given to entrepreneurs is that you should catch a wave.
I wanted to really learn about the different students I was interacting with. I had friends that were in the medical school, I had friends in law school, I had friends in the business school. And one of the things I came to understand in learning about the history of Silicon Valley is that the valley is built on a set of successive waves. And one of the waves was the PC wave. So one of my core messages for the group, we'll probably get to it a little bit later, is if you did nothing, I know most of you are here for master's programs, there might be some undergraduate.
That's not you, but somebody else, right?
As you're thinking about what you want to do when you leave this room, the number one thing I would advise you that would be smart to do is to figure out how to find a long wave, some immutable trend that is going to permeate most of the tenure of your career, the next 15 to 30 years. If you sat down and said, what are the big long waves that are going to happen during my lifetime? Jumping on one of them as a professional will probably be one of the smartest moves you ever do. Because if you did nothing but jump into the computer business in the late 70s, early 80s, even maybe all the way up to the Microsoft IPO, you had a phenomenal run. A phenomenal run. 20-something years, maybe 25 years, where you had a very high chance, much higher chance than the average person, of achieving a higher position, perhaps more material income, and just being in a better place than if you'd chosen, for example, Detroit. And so I think, you got to think about what wave you're on and how do you get on the wave that makes sense for you, both from an interest perspective, a geography perspective, what you want to do with your life. I decided that this was going to be a very long wave. This would probably be the most impactful wave. You can imagine what the other ones are. It's easiest to see them right here on campus. Because if you go read I read just this last week, the last statement that comes out from Dean Plummer from the School of Engineering, he tells you what the school's focused on. The school is focused in three big areas. Information technology, which it has been for a long time. That's kind of the most mature of the three areas it's really pursuing. Bioengineering, and moving biology to a quantitative science, and energy and the environment. Those are the three thrusts inside the School of Engineering right now. Guess what? 5 to 10 years from now, those are the students and professors and technologies that spin out and do startups. Why is the school oriented there? Because those are where the big challenges are. That's where they can recruit faculty to. That's where they can find research grants from. And so what you're seeing, research universities are the start of the waves. Right? So you're here at ground zero on it. You just have to look around and see what they are and understand what research is going on campus. So I don't know whether clean tech's the one for you, but I would tell you the number one thing you can do is figure out what wave are you riding, and make sure you're not on a wave that's going down.
So you want to catch a wave that is cresting and going up and go on. Here's a quick look at disruptive technologies and what we mean by them.
Somebody asked, what are the important new disruptive technologies of the future? And so I'd like to step through the initiatives that my partners and I at Kleiner Perkins are pursuing. And the first is in the area of wireless communications of all kinds. The second is in services for enterprises, institutions, whether they're hospitals or for-profit businesses, web services, security services, and importantly, search services. Let me suggest the following point of view. If in the early days of computing and software, all the important development work was writing to the iron, or writing to the microprocessor, developing the microcode for the chip, then operating systems were introduced, and we designed to and wrote operating systems. And then databases were introduced, and we wrote to databases. And I think for Web 2.0, for the next generation of web services, the most interesting services are all going to be built on search of one kind of a platform or another. So enterprise search, access to information, visual access, geographic access, semantic access. I'm going to talk more about consumer content in services. It's in red because I like talking about, hope you enjoy hearing about Google. We're involved in several other ventures in that field. Open source is a very important initiative and well positioned for contribution and advantage. Next generation chips and memory, I think that's where we'll see nanotechnology applied first. Innovations in energy is something that my partners and I have been very curious about for quite some time. Anybody see Tom Friedman's column on Sunday about his wanting to be, I think it was an eco-entrepreneur or eco-globalist? He said the best thing we could do for peace in the Middle East would be to innovate so much that the price of oil went to $18 a barrel. That would force social change,
Apparently, that's probably not a good
creation of
idea now.
opportunity more than
Because
any
A
agreement
lot
we
a lot of this
reached about the Gaza Strip.
instability is because the
I'm
gas,
optimistic.
oil
I think we'll
prices
get
have
to
gone
an
down so
agreement
much.
between the Palestinians and the Israelis before we get to $18 a barrel. But I also believe that innovations from entrepreneurs can get us there. In fact, we're involved in 4 such ventures today. Personalized medicine is a very exciting field. Our partnership has 2 or 3.
All right. Anyway, so he's just kind of pointing out different things. What I like about this is that the things he's talking about are still relevant now, but this is 10 years ago when he's saying them. So you have these people at think tanks, and so I'll be showing a lot of videos from the Stanford Entrepreneurship Center. These are engineers primarily, or people talking about engineering-related things, talking about what's coming down the road in the future. And even here now, 10 years later, we still don't see that vision has been fully realized. And so it's possible to find these trends way earlier than what we see when we see them, in the newspaper or a magazine or advertisement or even in products, by going to these research universities and seeing what's going on. And so one of the things I like to say is that the future is now, it's just not widely distributed, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen 10, 20 years from now that people are working on today. You just need to go to figure out where to find them. And most of them are pretty happy to tell you exactly what it's going to be, right? Because they're just doing the raw research right now. They're not actually commercializing these products. All right, so disruptive technologies kind of go to the source for these things. This is not working. All right, global considerations. So every company now has to worry about not just domestic competition, but global issues, global customers, global suppliers, legal issues in terms of labor, things like that. So lots of big things. This is a nice little blurb from Mark Zuckerberg to talk about how he came up with Facebook, which he was offered at one time $5 billion for, and he turned it down.
I actually studied psychology at Harvard, not computer science, although a little bit of computer science. I've been programming since I was like 10, and I think that it kind of kind of reached a point where it went into my intuition. I wasn't really thinking that much about it consciously. So that was pretty good. And then, when I started thinking about all the people issues, and doing psychology, and just like being in university, interacting with a lot of people, it just kind of occurred to me that this would be something that was interesting. And I knew how to do it, so I just did. It took me like a couple of weeks or even less to throw together the site. And I remember that by the time I was done throwing together the site, I had no idea how successful it would end up being. And I was actually thinking that after like day 8 or day 9, I had a different idea that I wanted to do, and I was going to scrap it and not do it. So I'm happy that I didn't do that. But so I think that it's more of like how you spend your time doing stuff type of question or type of answer than like something that I learned specifically from college. I made a ton of random things when I was at Harvard, and most of them no one ever saw. Like a lot of them just weren't meant for other people to see, and they were just things that I made for myself because I thought that they would be cool. I used to make stuff like a natural language interface to play my MP3s, Or the thing I made before this was a hot or not program out of everyone's IDs at Harvard that almost got me kicked out. But so I don't know. I spent a lot of time making random stuff, and I think that definitely made it so that by the time it came time to make this random project, I was pretty well tuned towards making that, In terms of managing this whole process, nothing, no, I had no idea what I'm doing,
Yeah, so he was offered $5 billion, and he turned it down, and now he's worth 50, 60 billion at least for Facebook. How many of you would turn down $5 billion for something you just randomly put together? Anybody? Yeah, this is like, wow. All right, so when you're looking at your particular idea that you're going to put together for your project here in class, but also for any company, things to be mindful of, it's going to be challenging. Bigger projects are going to be harder to control compared to smaller ones. It's going to take creativity, and then cash is king. In particular, cash flow. Cash flow is king. You're going to have some way to finance what you're doing. You can bootstrap it, which is pretty much generate your own investment out of what you have, and then have the sales of that business continue to fund it. You can get outside funding. There's a lot of different ways. Usually when you want to scale your business, when you want it to grow, you have to get some sort of outside funding, as we'll see with Instagram. There's an article in there that I asked you to read. It's called Test for the Faint-Hearted. And a couple of things that it points out is the challenges of being an entrepreneur. Thinking outside of the norm and breaking rules. Going against some pretty challenging competition who can squash you at any time. It's going to be a lot of man hours. You're going to have to put in a lot of time on something, then suddenly realize that it didn't work and you have to change what you're doing. So if you truly want to be an entrepreneur, it is a challenge. You put in a lot of time. But there's some big rewards, especially if you're doing a social venture, because the big powerful changes that we see in social enterprises, they can just accomplish so much because of the entrepreneurial aspect for it. Y'all remember the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge? Okay? So that was kind of an entrepreneurial way to raise money. Somebody said, you know what, let's find a way that we can create a viral campaign to raise money to help Lou Gehrig's disease patients and stuff. And I have a father-in-law who passed away from that. That campaign, the last time I looked, had raised over $100 million. And it's a very simple thing. But traditional fundraising would not have gone anywhere near that. So you can be an entrepreneur in a lot of different ways. I'm going to skip this video on do what you like. It just kind of focuses kind of on the passion part of it. But there's a link on Blackboard. You can look at it. What I want you to do now is we're going to break into our groups, and we'll spend 30 minutes, roughly, maybe 25 minutes, and have your group answer these 4 questions. You can either type them up and email them to me, or you can write them on a piece of paper. If you write them on a piece of paper, what I recommend is you start with question 1, and then you don't start question 2 until the middle of the paper, and then same with 3 and 4 on the back. The reason being is you'll answer the first question, and then you go to the next question, and then you realize you want to add stuff to the first question, and if you don't have that space, it's hard to do. And I've learned that doing this over the years. So, break into your groups, answer those questions as your group, and then we'll talk about it for a couple of minutes as a whole, and then be done. Okay?